Hey, how do you feel about some high rarity cards, or maybe some foreign ones, or maybe be ahead of the game with others by preparing for future set releases with very quick shipping? Check out EJ Gaming and use code British5 on checkout for 5% off on all your orders. Link in the description.
Greetings duelists and welcome to another video. So in the past video I did before this one, I spoke about the new cards for Vanquish Soul in Age of Overlord, and we already talked about like the value behind those cards and how does those cards fixes a lot of things that the deck lacked and things that to take into consideration with the deck moving forward. What I'm going to be doing today is another style video. What I'm going to do today is talk about what cards should you be running in Vanquish Soul, cards to consider. Do we still play some cards that the deck was already playing? Do we play certain ratios of certain cards and stuff to like take into consideration when it comes to like the new support with Age of Overlord. Age of Overlord is a really game-changing set. Like, it's not only going to change the dynamic of Vanquish Soul, it's going to change the dynamic of a lot of decks around it. So like, you have to not only be prepared with the new support, you also have to be prepared for the outliers and the decks that you would be facing against periodically. But without further ado, let's begin. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use this hand as an example because I'm going to show you some plays that are now possible with cards like, for example, the Jiaolong. And this hand that you see right here is like not the most uncommon hand. You will see a hand like this one, for example, in a bunch of times. So now what we're going to do is Rosin effect. If you remember like old style Vanquish Soul, back in the past we used to always search for Dr. Matlov. Depending on how the rest of your hand looks, you might always grab Dr. Matlov. Since we already have Jiaolong in hand, we're going to grab the Dr. Matlov. But in the off chance you have any other fire monster in your hand, you can just add the Jiaolong. And I'll explain right now why. Now that we added with Rosin, we're going to use its reveal effect. We're going to reveal a fire monster. The monster we'll be revealing is the Jiaolong. And since the Jiaolong got revealed, now this cannot be destroyed by card effects this turn. Since we revealed a monster for a Vanquish Soul effect, now Jiaolong triggers. And what Jiaolong does is that it can itself can be special summoned. Now we're special summoning the Jiaolong. Now what we're going to do is we're going to link away the Rosin, and the Rosin will make it so we can summon Rock of the Vanquisher. In the past, you would just use the Rock of the Vanquisher to special summon Dr. Madlove, and then Dr. Madlove will add us a spell trap. But let's do something different. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use Rock of the Vanquisher's effect to grab back Rosin from the graveyard. And the reason we're doing that is because now we have two fire monsters in our hand, meaning that you can do Jiaolong's effect, and Jiaolong is going to reveal both copies of Rosin. And it only the only thing it asks for is that it's two fire attributes. It doesn't matter if they're the same name or something different. So now that we're showing two Rosins, now we're going to add us as Vanquish Soul card. So this is really strong because basically the same value you would have gotten out of Dr. Madlove is the same value you're getting out of Jiaolong. The main difference is that now Jiaolong is going to be doing it every single turn. So that being said, looking at the rest of our hand, we have a plethora of options. One option that we can do is grab us Heavy Borgar since we have the Dr. Madlove in hand. And we can just special the Heavy Borgar, grab Jiaolong to our hand, reveal the Dr. Madlove, and that will give us a +1. And then you can just do the same thing in your opponent's turn. Let's go with that play first, just so I can show you something that can happen alongside that. So we're going to use Heavy Borgar, we're going to target the Jiaolong goes back to our hand, and now we're going to special the Heavy Borgar. Now we're going to do Heavy Borgar's effect. You already know that we have the Dr. Madlove, so that will going to net us a draw. We're going to put this draw here in the spawn trap just so you can understand and see where I'm going with this. Let's say you go on to the next turn and then you go to your opponent's turn. In your opponent's draw phase, what you can do is just reveal for Borgar again. and then it nets us another draw. We're going to put this in the spell and trap. Now that we revealed for Heavy Borgar's effect, we can activate Jiaolong. Jiaolong will summon itself. And then you can do Jiaolong's effect, reveal the 2 copies of Razen again. And both Razens just go to our hand, and the Jiaolong is going to net us a search for any card. Just for exploration and explanations, we're just going to grab the Caesar values. So what ended up happening with this combo? This combo pretty much netted you 2 draws and then add and an extra body on board. And that's really, really, really strong. Like, now your opponent really has a lot to worry about besides just Rock of the Vanquisher. Let's say we didn't do that play. Let's go back to the cards that we drew and the cards that we added. I think it was these 3. So let's put these cards back. Let's go back to our main phase and let us not add Heavy Borgar. Let us add something else instead. Let us grab us the new card, the Snow Devil. So let's grab the Snow Devil. We're going to set the Snow Devil and we're going to pass turn. In your opponent's turn, we're going to activate Jiaolong effect again, reveal the 2 Razens again, and this time we're going to add the Caesar values. What does that play do now? It looks a lot less impactful, like in paper, right? So if we go to the main phase, you can use Rock of the Vanquisher. Rock of the Vanquisher can just special Razen. Razen can grab us Heavy Borgar. Heavy Borgar can just like shift around itself with Razen. It can reveal the Dr. Madlove, give us a draw. And now you have like the Caesar value still, and you have other potential interruptions. But there's something more important than that. So in the past video, I explained why this card was really, really good for Vanquish Soul. I pretty much brought up that this is like one of the better cards that came out like for this archetype, and I'll explain now why. In the past, you would have to worry about your opponent potentially doing stuff like imperming you, or like dropletting you, or like board wiping you with like Raigeki and stuff like that. Now you don't have to worry about all those things anymore, because the moment if your opponent like tries to stop Rock of the Vanquisher and like you have no plays that your opponent can do, now something you can end up doing is you just activate the Snow Devil. And the Snow Devil will have all 3 effects because you have 3 different attributes. You added the Madlove on the prior turn, and then you added the Caesar values, giving us the Earth, the Fire, and the Dark attribute. Meaning that you can burn them for 1800, you can special summon a Vanquish Soul from your hand, and the Vanquish Soul monsters you currently control don't get blown up by your opponent. And that's really, really, really strong. Take note that this doesn't restrict you on which phase you use this effect. You can even do this in the battle phase as well. So something neat you can do, let's say your opponent got rid of the Jiaolong and they got rid of the Rock of the Vanquisher and they go to battle phase. Something really neat that you can do is you can activate Snow Devil, summon the Razen, blow up all the monsters on the board, and let's say for some rare instance a monster is still not destroyed. In the new chain you have the Razen that is going to like add us a monster. Let's say we add Jiaolong, at least another copy of it. You can now do Razen's effect, reveal a Fire and a Dark, which you already have with the Jiaolong and the Madlove. So try to blow up the opponent's monsters. And since you special summon with Razen, you can special summon the Jiaolong. And let's say, for example, your opponent still has a monster on the board, despite you resolving Snow Devil and Razen, and just summoning Jiaolong. Then you can do Jiaolong's effect and just reveal the Razen in your hand, and just shift the battle position on the monster. This is really good because, let's say, for example, you're facing XYZ monster. Let's say you're playing against the Purity deck and they have like the E Purity Happiness, and they just protected the happiness using the Happy Memory effect, which kind of protects them from like destruction. So that's like the perfect scenario that I can give you. You can use the Jiaolong effect, switch the happiness to defense, and like your opponent is shut down of all his purely plays because they couldn't just run over any monster. But yeah, like this is just like one example of a lot of things Vanquish Soul can do now. Now that I explained like one of the main combos of the deck, let's talk about card ratios. Let's talk about cards that you can play in the deck now and stuff that you should be considering whether or not you should play them in the deck or not. So the first thing I want to talk about is Triple Tactic Thrust. This card is not mandatory in this deck. However, now with the existence of Snow Devil, you can play this card in your main deck instead of your side deck, because now you have a potential card that you can set that is part of your engine. In the off chance your opponent does not control a monster, but you do actually get hand trapped. So that's like one good example of this. You don't have to play Trinity Burst. However, I feel like Trinity Burst is a card you should be able to consider now because you have an extra Vanquish Soul name, meaning that this card is a lot more efficient and more consistent at what it does. For those who don't know or remember what this card does, basically what it does is they will target a Vanquish Soul you control, and you can special up to 2 more Vanquish Souls from your hand that are different attribute and name from whatever you revealed. And then you can return cards your opponent controls up to the columns of the monsters you control that was a special summoned by this effect. This card is really strong. It can become a blowout. Like essentially you can end up bouncing up to 3 cards non-targeting for both spell and trap and monster columns. This card is harder to set up than Snow Devil. However, in the right scenario against certain strategies, this card can also be a blowout. Also, this does not restrict the monsters you summon from attacking. It does not force them to be in defense position. So like in some instance, if you're trying to try to go for game, you can just flip this card, summon your monsters, wipe out their board, and just attack with everything on the board. So yeah, this is a card you should be able to consider as an option if you're playing the Vanquish Soul deck. It is not mandatory. I still think the Snow Devil is mandatory. I think this card is like one of the better cards to play in this deck. However, this is just another option, especially if you're playing a card like Triple Tactic Thrust. So, let's talk about Jiaolong ratios. The Snow Devil is a one-of. However, I've had people ask me in the past, like, how many copies of this card you should be running in the deck. I feel like this is a 3-of. And I know that a lot of people are afraid of redundancy when it comes to a card like Jiaolong. But people also need to understand, this is a card that is strong even with redundant hands. Redundant hard hands with this card makes this card even better, because it makes it so you can actually use both effects like more periodically and more efficiently. So basically what's gonna end up happening is, if you, let's say for example, you end up like with 3 copies of Jiaolong in your hand, but you ended up summoning a Vanquish Soul, you can just reveal the 2 extra copies of Jiaolong and you can just keep adding cards to your hand left and right. So I'm going to say, if you're going to play this deck, you can play either 2 or 3. I think 3 it would be my highest recommendation. It is a level 5 monster, so it is prone to bricking if you don't open like the lower level Vanquish Souls, or if you don't open cards like Stake Your Soul. That is something to consider. However, like if you want your engine, or you want the most benefit out of this card's effect, you should be playing like the max amount of copies. Worst case scenario, you should play at least 2 copies of Jiaolong. So let's talk about older cards, cards that were already in the deck. True, we still play Pluton. So there's a debate that has been happening in the OCG. Some players were playing it, some players were not. I think that the role you want to pull off with Pluton is the role you'll already be encompassing with Jiaolong. However, something that's really neat about Pluton is that you can summon it from turn 0. So, like, let's say your opponent goes first and you have the Pluton on board. You can now do Pluton reveal special, then Pluton effect reveal boost defense, use Jiaolong's effect, Jiaolong special summons, then do something like heavy Borgar and just bounce back to Pluton. And then just special the Borgar, for example, and then you can just do Jiaolong, reveal Pluton and Rosin, and that nets you a search, and you're doing this like from turn 0. Another thing about Pluton that is really good is it's just another card that prevents your opponent from multi-K'ing you. It is another card that can just bolster your plays. It is another attribute to add if you already have Jiaolong in hand, if you want a different name. This card is really not that necessary anymore. I think with the existence of Jiaolong, you can just cut this card from the main deck. But there is nothing stopping you from just playing it in the main deck as well. It is another Vanquish Soul name that is different, so it helps with cards like Trinity Burst. Just to give like one or other examples. So the Rhard Engine with Fenrir. So there is a small debate involving this engine. Take note, this engine was not allowed in the OCG because in the OCG, Kashtira Fenrir is in the forbidden list, meaning that this package that we're running in this deck is going to be different here in the TCG than in the OCG. That being said, there are its merits and there are its caveats. So one merit that it has is that it can add you either an earth or a fire attribute, since we're playing the Rhard, and just giving you the ability of adding an extra fire attribute is more important now because of Jiaolong's existence. Like if you have a hand, for example, that has Fenrir and Rosin in it, like you pretty much have your most optimal combo right there because you're adding a fire with Fenrir and you're adding the Jiaolong. And you can just do rock effect, rock add Rosin back to your hand, and that's already 2 fire attributes for Jiaolong's effect. There are downsides, and one big downside is that it pretty much makes you a little bit more vulnerable to disruption. Like your opponent is just going to play around your cards a lot more. Let's say, for example, your opponent ends up like doing triple tactic talents and just stealing your Fenrir. That's going to be problematic for you. Like your opponent just trying to play around the Fenrir as a whole or trying to make it so you force the Fenrir effect is another issue. One other issue that I know that people have been having is the conflict between Fenrir and Snow Devil. If you ended up revealing and resolving Snow Devil and using all 3 effects, Fenrir is not a Vanquish Soul monster, meaning that the Fenrir will get popped and be caught in the crossfire of Snow Devil whenever it's resolving. So sometimes you will be in a position where people are just going to force you to flip Snow Devil very early before you resolve Fenrir's effect, and you just lose the value out of Fenrir. So is this engine still worth playing? I still think that it really ultimately depends. I'm not a fan of this engine, but I know that people have been doing very successful with it. And, you know, this card is still a 3, and I don't know why this card's a 3. Meaning that, you know, you're just going to greatly benefit from it, like, since it's legal. So, that's it for the Rhard package. So, let's see if any other card shows up that we can play or not. Parallel Exceed. So not many people do this. This is like one play that I've been doing in Vanquish Soul in the past. Basically, what Parallel Exceed enables you is the ability to just summon King Dempsey. And King Dempsey makes it so you can add Rosin to your hand. And like basically use your Rosin as part of your effect with Rock of the Vanquisher. And just starting out your Vanquish Soul plays. Um, I don't think this is necessary. Not many builds do play this card. However, I feel like with other potential rank 4s that we have, that we're just going to see like being played, like for example Baguska and Dweller, I think Exceed is still really powerful. It is a card to consider. If you're playing the Parallel Exceed version, it means that you have an easier time summoning and resolving SP Little Knight, which is another card to consider. Uh, Not many Vanquish Soul lists can play this, at least can play it the most optimal way, because Rock of the Vanquisher cannot be link summoned, meaning that it's not easy to have like a link monster or an extra monster as material for SP Little Knight unless you're contributing to more than 2 monsters. But in this build with Parallel Exceed, it's a lot easier to manage and a lot easier to do because you're summoning more free bodies on the board than you usually do. Also, this gives you the avenue for Splash Mage into like Heat Soul. You can also play Access Code in this build. So overall, this does have its weaknesses, but I do think this card is very welcomed in Vanquish Soul if you decide to play this version. Let's find other cards that like just function well with Vanquish Soul in general and whether or not we should play them. One card I want to talk about is Tisibu. So in the past, Vanquish Soul players have played this card in the main deck. In the main deck, it's really, really strong because a lot of decks that were popular pre-Agov were like monotype decks or decks that just played a lot of monsters of the same type. For example, Manadium, Purely, Flonderies, Unchained, Labyrinth. Those are just like a few examples of decks that we've been seeing in the past that just like really struggle against this card. Rikas on Avalon, like just another rogue deck. Moving forward, I still think this card should be played. However, I don't feel like this card can be played in the main deck. We're going to be in a format where it's going to be very experimental with a lot of hybrids, a lot of tech cards, and one of the decks that a lot of people are leaning towards is Tearlaments, and Tearlaments is a deck that really don't get hurt by this card. So whether or not you should play it, I don't think there's an incorrect answer. However, if you're going to like try to like be ahead of the format and like take into consideration decks like Rescue Ace with the Diabellstar engine or Tearlaments, I think this card is not going to work as well in the main deck as it would in the side deck. One card that we can talk about is Dimension Shifter, and let's talk about it in contrast to DD Crow. So as of late, a lot of people are leaning more towards DD Crow than towards Dimension Shifter. Dimension Shifter is a really, really strong card, and with Tearlaments being like one of the more popular decks in the format, I think this card has a lot of merit being played just because it's a deck that can really just skip their turn outright. However, a lot of issues that roll around like playing Dimension Shifter is that it does leave you susceptible to a few cards. If your opponent stops you in your engine, like in your tracks, like there's very little follow-up that you can have, and that means that you're just playing through the shifter, and they pretty much just play their turn as if their turn was never skipped. Another thing about shifter, it is a really bad draw after turn 1, like after you already resolved all your effects and all your cards and just like start picking apart like or just like resolving all your Vanquish effects, you're not going to get the most benefit out of shifter except being a reveal for your Vanquish effects. And that's where DD Crow comes in. DD Crow is really strong in the regards where like even though it does not outright skip an opponent's turn, it can just halt a lot of your opponent's plays whenever they're trying to dedicate or like commit part of their plays like into a card that just falls into the DD Crow. It's also a really good card you can draw later with Heavy Beauregard. You can draw as your 6th card and it'll also be useful. This also can hit spell and traps. So like against Labyrinth, for example, you can just hit their trap cards or your furnitures. Against Unchained, you can hit their Chiyama, and you can hit like their Vanquish. I mean, their Unchained traps if they're trying to set it with Sarama. Like against the Manadium deck, you just hit Visa Starfrost. Like, I don't say that there's an incorrect answer behind this. However, I've been leaning more towards DD Crow as of late. If you've seen past Vanquish Soul deck profiles, that has been like my MO with like the value behind this card. So I think this card is like just really good to just be played in the deck. I don't say that there's an incorrect option. I would say that once you're building this deck, just be wary of all the weaknesses and the pros and contrasts between both cards. Let's see what else are we missing. Let's talk about Small World. So there's the debate between Small World, Pot of Desires, and one card right here, which is the Infernoble Arms Durandal. So the benefits of Durandal is that if you're going second, you can activate this, and this can get you to Rosin. The disbenefit out of this card is that if you dedicate your normal summon to anything that's not Rosin, the Durandal is significantly weaker unless you can just use Rock of the Vanquisher to just summon Rosin. In a build that plays Kashtira Fenrir, this card is a little bit more welcomed because Fenrir is a free extender you summon, meaning that it's a card that you can just outright use for Durandal's effect and just get the benefit that way. Overall, it's very iffy when it comes to this card because this card is a lot hard, like easier to stop as well. Like if your opponent has something like a Cosmic Cyclone and you're trying to activate this going second, they can just flip the Cosmic and just get rid of this. Let's say they start to use other cards like Ghost Ogre or Magnum the Reliever, or like cards that just get the equipped monster off the board. Like for example, this just makes Durandal like a liability more than not. Let's talk about Small World. So, this is my favorite tech card in Vanquish Soul. If you've seen me play Vanquish Soul in the past, you know that I've been a very big fan of this card. I feel like any deck or archetype that just plays a lot of monsters just will benefit out of Small World more than not. It is a -1 after it resolves. However, if it gets you to like your win condition, you're going to circumvent out of that +1 like more than not. One big benefit out of this card is that like it makes you weaker to draw, it makes you weaker to Ash. It kind of feeds information out of your opponent on what other cards you're playing if you have to reveal a non-vanquished name. Like if you end up not drawing enough monsters to make this card work, that can also be like an issue. But yeah, if you're going to play Small World, at least 2 copies of it. And would I recommend Small World alongside Durandal? I don't think that would be like the best idea. The least amount of spell and traps in your main deck that you can play is the better for you, because Vanquish Soul, it is a monster heavy deck. It is a deck that relies a lot on having multiple monsters just for attribute reveals and just doing multiple effects and like stuff that like you can do outright. But yeah, like that's pretty much it when it comes to like the main deck. Another engine that I didn't put here in this deck, but it is worth considering, it is the Super Heavy Samurai engine. I still think the Super Heavy Samurai cards are really strong. They are extra earth attributes for reveals, which you don't have a lot of in this deck. You can just grab Rosin without your normal summon, which is another really strong thing you can do. However, one issue with that version, it is that it is a lot weaker to draw. And even though draw is not like the most popular hand trap this format, it is a hand trap that a lot of people are respecting and a lot of people are predicating towards. So let's talk about the extra deck real quick. This is an extra deck dedicated to Parallel Exceed, but if we were not to play Parallel Exceed, you can just cut the Heat Soul, you can cut the Splash Mage. The Zoo package is kind of debatable. It's something that I don't know if I like or not. Like in my last build, I wasn't playing the Zoo package, but it is something to highly consider. So let's talk about SP Little Knight for a second. So SP Little Knight is a really strong Link monster. I don't really have to explain all of that. You already know the utility behind this card as well. However, Vanquish Soul is a deck that really doesn't benefit out of SP Little Knight in comparison to like the Nightmares. The reason the Nightmares are more beneficial in this deck is because they can be co-linked with Rock of the Vanquisher, means that they're netting you a draw alongside like their other utility. One card I want to talk about, because not many people think about this card in Vanquish Soul, is Security Dragon. So if you read Security Dragon, once while this card is face out on the field, if this card is co-linked, you can target one monster your opponent controls, return it to the hand. So one really big benefit out of Security Dragon that you won't get neither from the Nightmares or from SP Little Knight is that it bounces cards back. That really does come up because branded or branded variants are going to be like around in the format, meaning that you're gonna have to face like the Mirror Jade, and if you don't want the Mirror Jade to trigger, you're going to bounce it back to an extra deck or banish it face down. There are no other ways of removing the Mirror Jade without the Mirror Jade triggering its effect to wipe out your board. So, like, if you're a Vanquish Soul player and you can fit this card in your extra deck, I really highly recommend it. Branded is not a really easy matchup, so just having a card that can just help against that matchup in particular really helps a lot. So I think I pretty much covered a lot of things that you have to be worried when it comes to Vanquish Soul. I already made a video talking about how bad the Tistina matchup is for Vanquish Soul. It's almost not winnable if they get their engine rolling. However, Tistina is not really a deck a lot of people are thinking about, so you really don't have to worry about it, at least for the time being. That being said, I think I pretty much covered a lot of ground. I think like this is the most that you'll get out of Vanquish Soul, like when it comes to a new release. This is a really respectable deck. Like as you already know, this deck has won a lot of events. This deck has been like in my radar, and I have been profiling this archetype a lot in the past. So just seeing new support for it really welcomes. I really do welcome it. But yeah, that's it from me. I hope you found this informative. I hope you found this to your understanding and to your liking. Even if you don't play Vanquish Soul, this might be helpful for you because you're going to be facing against this deck more than not. Yeah, keep practicing and keep dueling.